the wonderful principal of the Barbara A. Sizemore Academy, affectionately known as BASA. And I asked her if she would be a part of this conference in preparation for future conferences. So she and I have done some work, I think it was good work, about the importance of recognizing how to educate African American children. BASA is a school, one of very few schools in the country that is, the term that's used that I like is called an A school. They provide an African-centered education. And we're committed to, she and I are committed to building that in a way that sometimes it's not even clear that we represent two different organizations. So we kind of blend it together in a way that just seems spiritual and natural from my perspective. And it's one of the challenges that BASA has is being on our campus. So they have to constantly, as all schools do, have to constantly pay attention to enrollment trends. But when you think about the fact that they're offering something very specific that is not available widely, and that it is unique and that it's needed, what you hear today, I think will convince you that it's not just an alternative, it's necessary. We are as a country, we're going to be at a deficit if we lose the sense of educating children where they understand themselves centrally rooted, and that they grow from their childhood to their adolescence to their adulthood with a very strong sense of who they are in community, not simply who they are as individuals. So their accomplishments and their responsibilities reflect the larger sense of self that we know from certain traditions. So that's why I wanted to talk, because the Paris is going to be more engaged in the conversation about how can we make sure that a place, any school that is doing such wonderful work is not going to be suffering or potentially lost because nobody knew to bring their child to the place of excellence. So we could do a lot more about promoting that if we choose to. And we want to be more attentive to the work that is being done, not simply because it's on our campus, but because it also feeds us. It's a part of our ministry to make sure that the children in this zip code get the best education that they can get, so they can be the best people they can get. And hopefully, hopefully it'll be a moment for us to do some evangelization as we meet those families. We certainly can say the doors of the church are open. So that's a brief introduction to an introductory conversation. And with that, I want to once again welcome Mama Jocelyn Mills. And at BASA, the leaders, teachers, educators, and staff members who are female are referred to as Mama, and the males are referred to as Baba in the West African tradition. So welcome.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Father Jones, for that wonderful introduction. I personally feel so honored to be here today to talk to you about ACE, or African-Centered Education, just because I feel there are so many more esteemed elders that he could have called on to have this conversation. But I feel honored and privileged to be here to discuss it because of where I am in my own journey with understanding African-centered education, and also being able to translate for people its importance. So for example, he is absolutely correct when he says that there is, we do have very, what I would call very connected missions. I think a lot of people think that the African-centered education is all about how you look, and it really isn't. It's mostly about one thing, and that is the truth. I know that a lot of people think that you have an African-centered education just because you want children to feel good. The feeling good is a byproduct of being truthful with children. And the truth, that's a large part of what your organization is also doing. It should be rooted in truth. And so there are, what I would like to do is just to kind of walk you through just really in general, 5 benefits of African-centered education. And then if I have the ability to share my screen, I'm going to share with you an example of why children need to know the truth about who they are and where they come from. The first reason on why, and I kind of have my notes here, so if I look down, just know I want to be thoughtful about what I present to you today. One of the things I think is really important to understand about getting to that truth is that we owe it to children to tell them the truth. I think a large part of our children are suffering in part because they don't know the truth about who they are, where they come from. One thing to keep in mind, and Dr. Amos Wilson said this best, he said that when a person's culture is distorted, they don't have the capacity to organize, evaluate, and classify information. That's why the truth is so important, because our children have to know when someone's telling them a lie. And you can't know that for yourself if you don't know the truth. And a large part of our culture, let's be very frank, tells lies about Black people and African peoples. And so there has to be a counter to that. We have to be very intentional in feeding that truth, making sure that they're armed with that so that when they see a lie, they know it's a lie. So that's number one. So that distortion of who they are and where they come from is very important. The second reason for African-centered education has to do with the fact that if we don't do an African-centered education, our children think that they just come from slaves, because they think that that's when our history started, and it's not. Our history as a people doesn't start with our enslavement. And that's part of getting to the truth, that we have been great for a very long time. And understanding how our greatness and resourcefulness came with us in a way that allowed us to survive, to be creative, to be innovative, and to make great contributions to American history. The third reason that we want them, which I feel is the most important reason, is because if you don't have a self-centeredness in your culture, then you can't be a builder. We see that a lot, even in our communities. I can tell you, in speaking with young people, especially some of our brightest and best in Inglewood, they feel that the only way they can be successful is to flee. That they know, if I'm going to make it, if I'm going to go to a great high school, if I'm going to go to a great college, I have to flee my people. I have to leave them behind. That is what is killing our communities, because our best, our brightest, and our promise, they don't know how to thrive and carry the rest of us. And so they flee us. And you know, that's the most tragic and heartbreaking thing about our communities, because I think to myself, imagine Inglewood if it had been able to retain and keep every doctor, lawyer, psychologist, entrepreneur that is out there right now somewhere else doing this work instead of in Inglewood, where they felt like they had to leave, or they weren't going to make it. So I learned this lesson very by accident. I was doing what is known as an empathy interview, where I was interviewing students who had left us. They graduated from BASA and they're at Whitney Young. They are off. And they said to me directly, we would have never left you if you would have had something for us. That's a really heavy burden to feel, that children feel like I had to leave because you didn't have anything for me that could allow me to stay. So if we're going to be builders, we have to prepare them for their communities, and we have to say, no, baby, you don't have to leave. You can stay right here. There's a place for you right here. Yes, we have problems, but we aren't going to fix them unless we have you. We need your gifts. We need your strengths. We need your skills, your intelligence. We need you, or we're not going to make it. And unless we have schools that are imparting that message, the rest of us are saying, yay, you got in Whitney Young. And that seems like a very high compliment because the child is in one of the best schools in the city. The problem is there should be Whitney Youngs all over. She shouldn't have to leave for that. That we should have built that space for her in our communities. And so that is that's one of the most important pieces that I feel like is overlooked in African-centered education, is that it should be about building. The fourth piece that I would like to say is that there's a leadership void. We aren't doing a very good job, in my opinion, of making sure of two things. Number one, that when children and young people inherit our communities, they know what to do with them. That they've been taught, they've been well trained, they've been groomed. We can't wait till they get grown for them to finally get a leadership role. The best examples that I can give you is people will make note a lot of times of how different our music is. That R&B is really suffering. And I always bring their attention to the fact that the best R&B and soul singers in American history, in Black culture, came out of the church. And they started these children young. Whitney Houston started very young. Aretha Franklin started, like these were children who were developed. They started singing almost as babies, and they were groomed for those voices. They just didn't wait till they were 21 to start singing, and then they had these phenomenal voices. Those voices are what I call investments, that people looked at young children and could recognize different gifts and make sure that they were in the right lane and getting the right investment and attention. And that's how you build greatness. And then the last one is, like I said, about empowering our young people. For them not to feel like someone has to come to save them. Because I think that notion is not realistic. It's the same conversation even when I have a chance to teach children. No one is coming to save you. You know, you have to, Black people will have to figure out how to save ourselves. Period. And so that is pretty much most of the benefits of African-centered education. One thing I would like to do right now is to just kind of stop at this point and see if you have questions or if there's anything that I need to clarify for you before I can show you what this looks like in action.
Do you mind saying a little bit about your own background and how you came to this type of education?
Wonderful. My own background is why I love what I do. If you can't tell from the accent, I am originally from the mountains of Tennessee. I come from a line of educators. Surprisingly, my hometown is the birthplace of a place called Nelson Mary. And Nelson Mary was a Black boarding school. And nestled in the mountains, it was in between two HBCUs that trained teachers, Morristown College and Knoxville College. And it was a training ground for people who wanted to teach. People from Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Pittsburgh, all of that sent their children there to be very well educated. So it was a very unique experience. But I didn't get the experience of my mother and my grandmother because they were taught by people who loved them, and I was not. And that is the part that has to be addressed as the legacy of integration that no one really wants to talk about. I was the only Black child in elementary school till my brother came 4 years later. And I will tell you, that's probably the only decision that my parents made on my behalf that I deeply question. It was as bad as you would think. And to ask a small child to kind of navigate that, that experience has given me a lot of respect and insight for someone like Ruby Bridges' mother, just trying to figure out, like, wow, I know, having been through that, I would never ask my own child to do that. It was just, there were some very traumatic experiences. And so having been the saving grace for me was the fact that I had such a family who came from a very deeply rooted kind of legacy in education. And so they knew how to get me ready. But I can say to you that there are those of my peers who suffered greatly due to what I would perceive to be very oppressive types of experiences for children. The problem that I found once I moved here is I thought that those were experiences that were specific to that geographical location. And having been a practitioner of education since 1997, I have since found out that my experiences are mostly what I have in common with most Black children. Most of them do not go to school in places where they are loved. And that is, Father Jones will tell you, that's everywhere we go, I kind of tell that story because I think people have to kind of understand why you may feel convicted about what it is that you do. And so I think I hope my answer has engaged and provided you with some context on why I feel very strongly about educating Black children. It's not to say that I don't feel strongly about educating children in general, but I will leave you with this analogy. If you have two houses on the street and one is on fire and the other is not, which one are you going to give the hose to? And obviously you're going to give water to the house that's on fire. Our children are suffering. And so that is where a lot of my work is rooted. So I hope I gave you a long story and an answer, but I wanted you to know sincerely where my conviction comes from.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you repeat the number one benefit of African American centered education?
Absolutely, because it develops a consciousness that's rooted in truth. If you can't, like, that's the benefit of teaching children the truth. If they don't know the truth, then when they encounter a lie, they don't know to even question it. Let me put it to you this way. There has been a great deal of effort spent in either erasing or distorting the contributions of Black and African peoples. And you have to ask yourself why that is. People who don't know the truth are easily manipulated. And they don't question things. So it serves, it's kind of like, one of the best examples I can give is Chris Rock. He's the comedian. He says the money's not in the cure, the money's in the medicine. There are lots of people that make a lot of money off of the dysfunction of Black children and Black people in general.
Mention the prison system.
Exactly.
Good example.
Exactly. You know, and in some states, particularly those in the South, they have privatized those, almost where you now have an incentive to create a whole cohort of people to go into the prison system, because if they don't meet their quota, the state has to make up the difference in the cost of the beds. People have to know that. This is something our young men definitely need to know. You are part of an economic system in their eyes, and you would be smart to know that. So that distortion, they're not lying just to lie. There's benefits to that. And so we want to make sure our children question the things that they're told. All right. Did I answer your question?
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, good. Are there any others before I share my screen and show you kind of what I'm talking about?
I have one question, if I may.
Absolutely, ask away.
I love that your emphasis is on truth. That's what we need. You know, that's the foundation of every good thought and every good deed that we're going to do. Is there any way, or is there any parallel to that teaching that you have that emphasizes virtue, like courage, so that there's less accommodation as they're growing through stages of development to, well, you know what I'm saying, our racist experiences.
Absolutely.
Whether they're small children or, you know, middle school children, high school, and so forth. There has to be, I think, a parallel teaching, if not terribly spiritual, at least a great awareness that we have a virtuous side that we have to develop as well.
Absolutely. And that's why one of the things I actually admire about BASA is that it is designed around two bodies of work. One is the virtues of Ma'at, and then the other is the principles of Nguzo Saba.
Oh, yes.
And so most of all of our conversations have to be rooted around those principles and those virtues, because what you believe in, how you behave, shapes your character. And so that's why, you know, I think a lot of people, when they look at, say, something like the virtues of Ma'at, they always start with order, because order is the preciseness of the natural order of things. But that I led out today with truth, because I have found that order cannot be found in lies.
Right.
That lies create a sense of chaos, as it's designed to do.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I tell people that the actual benefit of African-centeredness is the truth. That we aren't telling children, making up stories about African greatness. It's the truth.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? That African greatness is a real thing. It's the truth. And
Yeah.
so getting to them to understand that who has the biggest incentive to misrepresent that greatness? Not me. And so to your point, one of the things I think we must address is dead center what is African, so that we know it when we see it.
I totally agree.
One of the things that you can see African principles, you can see African contributions everywhere.
Yeah.
If you know the truth.
In the Vatican.
So a large part of the things that we think are American are African.
Yeah.
And so our kids are walking by these things and aren't able to recognize that came from me, that came from my people. You know, even like we greatly admire the symbolism of the White House. We built it.
Right.
That's
right.
our architecture.
Yeah.
You know, like I laugh when I go to the South, because you have people who talk about the architecture and the porches. That's a West African architecture.
Yeah. Design.
You know what I'm saying? So I know that when I see it, but that doesn't mean that every other Black person is able to recognize. And that's why it goes back to knowing the truth, because then you can see where your greatness has been distorted, and your contributions have been erased.
Yeah.
So, but again, it has to be rooted in principles, like even understanding something like UJIMA, collective work and responsibility. I tell people all the time, had this pandemic maybe have happened in my grandmother's time, it would look different. Because all these women who would have had to go to work would have gotten, they didn't have daycares, they didn't have, like, they would have gotten together and found some way of watching each other's children. So this one could go to work, they would have worked out a schedule, they would have had to lean on each other in a much different way than we do right now, because we don't have those networks anymore. So we're suffering, trying to figure out how to do this as nuclear families.
Yeah.
And that was never how we ever worked to begin with. And so some of our fracturedness has to do with the fact that we've lost some of our Africanness.
Yeah.
In understanding that we all have a responsibility to help each other with our children. You help me, I help you. And then we figure out how to work from there. So those are very strong African principles. And if we get too far removed from that, it hurts us worse, because we have to depend on each other to make it. Like my grandmother didn't go to the grocery store but once a week. If she ran out of eggs, milk, sugar, flour, you had to go next door up the street to get something from Miss Sally.
Yeah.
And that's how we made it.
That's true.
So, you know, those recognizing those types of outcomes might put us back in the mindset of getting back to our original greatness.
So
Jocelyn, one point and then one question. So Dr. Kevin Johnson is a composer who's been very kind to St. Benedict and composed some music for us, in fact. And one piece that he was very excited about, and we're familiar with it, we've heard it enough, is an opening song, a gathering song that said, the lyrics say, never forget the place where you've come from.
yeah.
And then he has a subtle chant, I don't know the musical term, but it's like underneath the singing, there's this chant of the word Africa. And his point was, and he is so Catholic. I mean, he wants everything about his work to make sense according to his faith. And he said what he thought about that was, it's never forget where you've come from requires you to know where you've come from. And if everything starts in one place, so he's working with the science of life begins on the continent of Africa, and that the only reason we perceive differences is because of the ways in which we migrated away from there. But his point was that would be the most Catholic thing, to always be connected to where you've come from and see the world in that way. So I don't know, he may not use, he would use the word Catholic in the way that you use the word African-centered, the words African-centered. And that draws me to the question is like, it's also restorative, isn't it? So there is, I mean, we know the academy. We know the academy that we use in our time and in our culture is developed out of Western philosophy. And all pedagogies are going to have cultural bias. So it's not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's simply saying that, but what you'd also have to know is, where did the Western philosophers get their work?
Absolutely.
And that, again, takes it back to, yeah, these things came out of the Nile Valley. So it reaffirms the need to not shortchange the education by taking it at its most recent form, but always knowing it in its original form. And when I hear you, I'm thinking that's the work that you try to do to various young minds, but it's a bigger work in terms of how philosophies and academies form the way in which we understand ourselves and understand our opportunity to live.
Absolutely. And I love that what you're saying is in that focus on self, because one of the things I try to tell our children is the first village is in you. The very first village that you have is in you. Your understanding of truth, your understanding of order, all of those things, they start inside yourself. And so even it is in many ways, the building of villages is around the strength of our people's spirits and morality. And so I think that that's where the work that we do is married up. You're not gonna have, what's the point in having a village that's not healthy and whole, morally, physically, spiritually, and intellectually?
Yes.
And so that's that real work of having what you're saying, understanding that truth, that's even your spiritual centeredness comes from a specific place. And then it was able to spread.
We had a conference yesterday on social Catholic teaching, the 7 principles of that. And I'm not sure if Sister Jamie said this in the conference or if she and I were on the phone, because we had a bunch of conversations over the last 2 days. But she said that she wanted to make clear that Catholic social teaching is to help you become an individual who doesn't suffer from rugged individualism. Her point is that we suffer a lot in our culture because Americans are so formed to be individuals. And that this Catholic social teaching tells you, no, we have an opportunity to be a bigger self. So don't be your individual self, be your communal self.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So one of the things I'm going to stop here to kind of show is an experience that I had this week. Our BASA is participating in the National Summer School Initiative. And I happened to be in a training with hundreds of teachers across the country. And, you know, I'm not necessarily teaching, I'm in there as an administrator. But I want to share something with you on why I had to, for lack of better words, take them to church, so to speak, because I do want you to see where African-centeredness approaches things from the truth. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this is what was shared. And this is what was discussed in the National Summer School Initiative. Now, when I saw this, I thought, yes, how noble of them to incorporate Black faces, Black voices, a Black perspective. But then once we started getting into it, it was very whitewashed and very superficial. And had I not known the truth, I would have not been able to push back. So the title of this is What We Don't Learn About the Black Panther Party, But Should. Okay, and this is a reading for 4th grade. Now what happened is once they started getting into the meat of this particular assignment or reading, it became very superficial. So for example, they were asked, okay, the teachers were asked, so what's the topic? And they said, the Black Panther Party. I said, absolutely not, that's not the topic. You look at the title tells you very clearly where you should go with this lesson if you're African-centered. Because the question is, why don't you learn about the Black Panther Party? Because there's really only 2 reasons that you wouldn't: erasure or oversight. And so as a teacher of Black children, you have to start with that context first. And so it was amazing to me to watch how people struggled to understand that part. Well, no, it's just a topic. We're only talking about the Black Panthers, not all of this stuff. And then even to scroll down and look here, if you can see where it says, the very first issue of the Black Panther newspaper wanted to know why was Denzel Dowell killed? Now, I don't know if you've been on social media or watched the news, but we're asking that exact same question on Breonna Taylor, on Elijah McClain, on Trayvon Martin. So and when we got to discussing, they skimmed over this entire paragraph, and it was never discussed as an important piece of information. And the problem was, if you look here, this brings it to the current date of Black Lives Matter. So that piece would have brought the children from the past to the present in looking at what we are still trying to fight and still trying to battle. Now, they finally realized what I was talking about when we got to the last paragraph, where it says the FBI's plan to destroy the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party was there was a deliberate attempt to destroy them from our government because white people were so scared of them. This is not a topic of the Black Panther Party. They didn't just do this to the Black Panther Party. And not only is there somewhat of a deliberate attempt to dilute the power of the Black Panther Party, you can see that some in the Black Lives Matter movement, where you have these questions that get thrown out. Well, where's the source of their funding? And did all of those very deliberate attempts at propaganda to destroy it. And you can see here, fake news, it says the FBI planted fake news in the media to discredit Panther leaders and as an organization. Fake news has been around a long time. And so I just wanted to kind of share with you that as a teacher rooted in African-centered understanding, what you now have is a centeredness of children in their own culture. So though they're reading an article, let me see where this article came out of. It came out of the Zen Education Project, which is a pretty good source. Because I'm knowledgeable about the Black Panther Party and the things that they endured, I am able to see this from a different context. And not just say, oh, this is an article about the Black Panther Party, and we should understand them because like the Black Panther Party has done a great work and has contributed a lot of great things to American culture, particularly free and reduced lunch.
Yeah.
That comes from their work. That is their original program.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, why is there an erasure of them in history books? That's a major contribution to feed children. But I wanted to share that with you so that you can kind of begin to understand the work of the truth. Why the truth is important. If I did not know the truth, how can I teach it to children? And if you don't know the truth and you don't teach it to them, they're just reading an article about the Black Panther movement and aren't digesting that there were some major contributions in history from this organization.
That's right.
And so it has to do to that truth, that center of truthness, of seeking it out, allows you to push other people into the direction of truth. And that's also our calling too. We have many of the same outcomes, both as a church and as schools, because we are part of the same communities. Why would we have different missions? Most of what children learn is at home, at school, and at church. That's how they learn about their culture.
Mm-hmm.
If our institutions don't have the same mission, then we aren't serving the same people. So I am now also just going to give you an opportunity to ask more questions or to give more insight or to share with me your own viewpoints about the importance of creating schools where we tell the truth. You know, like if I were asking us to make up things about how great Black people were, that would be wrong to do. I'm not even doing that. I'm saying, let's just start with the truth and see where we go with that. But one thing I will say is a byproduct of this that I see when kids leave us, they question, they push. They don't just leave us and go to schools where they believe just what their social studies teacher told them, because they know I'm supposed to question this. I want to know your source. So like I can remember a young man who came in and he was told by his teacher that there weren't horses in Africa during a specific period of time. And I can only tell you how proud he was to go back to his class with primary and secondary sources and hold his teacher accountable for not knowing the truth. So I don't know how we're gonna make it unless we have children that are full of truth. We don't need them full of lies, or at least not even able to recognize the difference. That's a very dangerous space to be in as people. So please share your thoughts, questions, ideas.
I remember when I was, this was back in the 70s, and I hated history at that time because I couldn't, one of the things I didn't like about it was, one thing that didn't make sense even then for me was, how can we be here 300, 400 years and not have contributed anything other than, Washington Carver, George Carver with the peanut. And then at that time we were learning about Dr. Martin Luther King. So we had Dr. Martin Luther King, Crispus Attucks, Harriet Tubman, and that was about it.
Absolutely.
And then it makes sense to me then. So I didn't really pay a lot of attention to history, and that caused me to have to go to summer school. And I went to summer school, and there was a young teacher who came in, and she said, I'm going to teach you from this book because this is what they've assigned. He said, but I also am going to teach you from this book. And in that book we would read about Columbus, and then we would read the other book that told you what really happened with Columbus and how he slaughtered the native people on the islands and all that. And it was like, it really kind of opened my eyes up. So after that, I really began to love history. Because now, when I hear a piece of history, I go and I kind of look it up more now to see what else happened.
You know what? And it all started with the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All knowledge of self, of family, of community, of world starts with the truth. You cannot be a knowledgeable person, an intelligent person, not knowing the truth. And so I think I know you guys are so tired of me here saying the truth, but that is really where it starts, because it's only when you have your first encounter with the truth that you begin to question every other thing that you've been told. And so that's very empowering to a young person to finally say, you know what, I'm gonna question that. I'm gonna think for myself what I've been told. Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay, Mama Jocelyn, I have hanging on my wall something that one of my great nieces wrote. And it says, I am Black excellence because I come to school ready to learn. I also can say I am Black excellence because when I'm at home, I do what my parents tell me to do, whatever it is, whether I like it or not. I also am Black excellence because when I'm in trouble and I make a mistake, I try not to do it all over again. I was very impressed because I've seen how open they have become since they've been at your school. I actually had two great nieces graduate from there in 2019. So I can attest to how important it is for them to know the truth and to learn the truth, because it opens their minds and they don't just settle for anything. Like if you say the sky is blue, they don't accept that the sky is blue. They want you to tell them why that sky is blue. So I love the curriculum there.
Thank you. And I actually appreciate your saying that, because when they say I am Black excellence, I think one of the things, that's where the truth is so important. Because, and this is even from a spiritual standpoint, whatever you say after I am is what you are. I mean, that's why Christ said he was the great I am. You, whatever you feel in right there, it encompasses all. So when you tell children that they have a very clear understanding of what that Black excellence looks like, it allows them to kind of walk through that path of all the people who came before them, who represented that. And now they're standing in that space of being able to take it forward. So I love that you shared those examples, because one of the things we also share with students is the concept of BASA made. And so we recently had some graduates, and we're so proud, like they're going to some really great schools. And of course, social media being what it is, you're able to see their discussions. And I was actually on a thread where they were talking about, I'm getting ready to go to the University of Missouri, and they're gonna find out what it means to be BASA made. It means they understand that they are different creatures, that when they show up, things change. That we're just not going there to go to school, that we're gonna give them all the business. And so it just, to see that play out, especially in children who are very much aware that there are people who have very negative views of who they are and who they could be. And so that's why that concept of Black excellence has to be in their consciousness. It has to be something they breathe, because they need that strength as they encounter people who don't see that excellence in them. And so it becomes a form of rebellion for them in a certain space where I am great, I come from great. And so it is, I'm glad that you shared that. And I'm very touched by the writing, because I think that if that's going to go a long way.
I was very touched by it too. That's why I have it, because I often go back and read it, because it's powerful.
It is powerful. And you know what? I'm going to tell you that that's why the pandemic has been very difficult for me, because that's my work every day. I see that all day long, every day. And so I know I began to take it for granted. And now that I don't see it, it's hard. I really miss the work of children. Doing proximity makes a difference. And though we're trying to do it from a distance, it's those experiences of children telling you, I am Black excellence, that affirms your work. You know, like I need to hear those messages because they tell me that what I'm doing makes a difference, that I matter to them. And because I can be very frank, the work can be taxing and it can be full of disappointments and heartbreaks. And it is those children and the things that you hear them say and the things that they do that keep you going, so to speak. And so thank you for sharing that, because it puts me back into my right mind.
Hi, Mama Jo.
I'm sorry.
Oh, hi. I teach third grade, and I just love everything that you're saying because I think that is so true that when you teach kids about their truth, their understanding is so completely different. And I noticed that a lot of our social study books always start with slavery when it talks about Black people. And so, like the gentleman was saying before, I always pull in other resources to kind of like, you know, show them, okay, well, this is one perspective, but this is what actually happened. And I feel like when I had those conversations with third graders, they're like 8 and 9 years old. They're looking at me like in a state of shock, but they're so engaged. It's like the best conversations I have with them. They're asking lots of questions, giving a lot of feedback. And it's like it just changed their whole outlook when we have these conversations. I found myself going past beyond the time that I'm supposed to be teaching that particular subject because our conversations are so rich. And I feel like sometimes I'm exposing them to something that they haven't really heard before. So sometimes I kind of feel like, okay, I will tell my students to go home and talk to your parents about it, so that they could get more insight from their parents. But kind of like with the Columbus example, it's like they're giving this, the book is giving them this one thing like, oh, he's just exploring and he comes over here. But the true reality is they did slaughter all of those Native people. And so I use it to try to bridge a gap between what happened then and what's continuing to happen with all these other different races. And I just feel like it's not really in our curriculum, but I just feel like it's necessary. So I try to weave it in there as much as I can. And I do this every year with my third graders. And I just feel like they, you know, I'm supposed to be teaching Chicago for third grade, but I still find a way to incorporate in my curriculum. And I just feel like it would benefit our kids more. And I work in a CPS if it was an actual curriculum that all the kids got. Because for instance, we had 2 third grade classrooms, and one was taught by a Caucasian lady, and I know they weren't learning the same thing in their classroom for social studies that I was teaching in my class. So I just feel like all these kids should be getting the same thing, and I just really want to, you know, it's been a passion of mine to create something more concrete within CPS that all the kids get at a certain age. And I just feel like we don't really have like a rites of passage for our children so that they can all get this information around the same time in their lives so that they can, you know the truth. And when they, like you said, when they hear things, they can have an in-depth conversation about it because they really truly know, okay, everything that somebody's telling me or everything I'm seeing is not always facts, and you got to question it. But I just wanted to say that I love what you guys are doing, and I would love to incorporate that any way that I can with the work that I do.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a secret. You ready for this?
Yep.
One of the things I found out in this journey is that there's an actual ACE curriculum in CPS that they were actually supposed to be mandated to teach by the Illinois law.
Wow.
Yes. It's been very difficult getting our hands on said curriculum that many of our Black scholars in the city work very diligently at putting together. So you might want to start asking around on where this curriculum is.
Okay.
Because I have had numerous conversations with people who were actually part of writing it.
Wow.
And
I've heard of it.
has disappeared. So I want to put that bug in your ear. And then there's also another body of work is to check out Portland essays. Portland essays, that was a body of work put together from a group of scholars. I want to say maybe Dr. Aisha Hilliard was part of that work, but it's a series of essays and things like that that you can incorporate in your classes.
Okay.
But I think one of the things I often tell people when they start to have conversations about the curriculum, that's why you hear me say, teach the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things I recognize is that going forward, I was never going to be in control of what the children learned once they left me.
Right.
And so the truth is always a good place to start, just because it teaches them to think for themselves. And so they can begin to counter, they won't buy into this narrative that Christopher Columbus, like, he didn't even discover America. Let's
right.
get that out of the way.
Right.
Start with that. So, that's why the truth is a good place to start, because the truth is rooted in questions. Like, I need to question what I am told. And I'll be frank, as we move through with social media, I think questioning is becoming one of the most underutilized intellectual abilities that we bring back as soon as possible. People are sharing sources that are questionable. They don't, if anything at all doesn't align with something that they believe, they don't want to read it. So we got to teach our students better how to interact with information.
Mama Jocelyn.
Yes.
I'd like to really thank you for what you shared with us, and you've opened my eyes. I'm originally was born and raised right across the river from you in Little Rock, Arkansas, where there were 2 HBCUs there also. And thanks to the Catholic Church in Little Rock and North Little Rock and my mother, I was successful in getting an education there, and then to move on to a historically Black college, Philander Smith College from there, which led to my landing where I am now in Chicago, Illinois. But I just like to fast forward a bit, because all my life I've been involved in Black higher education funding and working with alumni of those institutions. But right now where I am, as a retired person, I know that my focus and my activities have changed, and they will continue to change. But something that was shared here today about our history, I realized of something that I just recently did. As chairperson of a committee, a program that Father David's aware of, the Male Image Awards, we're going virtual for next year. And as program chairperson, one of the things that I identified that can be removed from the program so that we'll stay within a certain time frame was the rites of passage led by Yakima Perkins that we have done for over 27 years. So now my challenge is to go back to the ladies and let them know that we must revisit it. Either it's on the program or both, but through a virtual setting such as this, it can be a criteria, a responsibility of all the young men to participate. And Mr. Perkins can really do a good job with what he does very well around a setting like this. If I had not tuned in this morning, we would have just gone on. So just pray for me that, we can move forward in this area.
One thing I will tell you too, and I'm glad that sparked something in you to recognize that the rites of passage just ongoing.
Yes.
Graduate, like I'll be 50 soon, and I'm still walking out my rites of passage, in a manner of speaking. And so I think one thing to just recognize is the opportunity of taking technology, and how to expand that programming, and not necessarily. So maybe the call isn't how to figure out how to fit it in and make it small,
but make it great.
but how to make it expansive.
Yes, yes.
And so I think once you start thinking in that way, the program design will come to you pretty quickly.
Yes.
Maybe God's putting it in your heart not to diminish it.
Oh no, I got it now. Yes.
Yeah.
Catherine, just a point of information. That's Ucini, Eugene Perkins.
Ucini, yes.
And he was one of the, in fact, he was the first person who contacted me about BASA coming to St. Benedict.
Oh, okay.
So just a small connection. That's a big connection.
Absolutely.
Listen, it is 1:15. I asked Mama Jocelyn for an hour, so I do want to pause at least to say thank you and thank you for helping us to better understand the mission from your desk, so that we can continue to see how we can be supportive of education of children in this zip code. And we're fortunate that we have one partner at least that we wholeheartedly agree with, and we appreciate that you're doing the work, so that we're in a nice position to be supportive, so that we don't have to be the teachers and the principal and the folks who figure out how to pay for the entire program. So it's a privilege. It's a privilege to support it.
I want to, before I leave, and thank you for inviting me, I want to just publicly acknowledge Bob Jones and his work at BASA. He's really been a true benefit and a blessing. And I also want to thank the members of his congregation. I'm clearly aware oftentimes of how blessed we are as a school to just be that close to people who are doing the same work. So I want to thank you all for all that you are doing for BASA. And I am going to be presumptuous at this point and say that if you are on this call, you actually care. And I want to thank you for that. That means so much, because that's where a lot of the heartfelt work starts, is just in caring about the issue, and then finding a way to move forward. So I thank you for your time